Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third annual Board of Finance Open Public Forum on this year for the fiscal year 2012 budget. My name is Tom Flynn. I'm the chairman of the Board of Finance for the town. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce several members of our board, as well as our chief fiscal officer, Mr. Hiller, who's at the end of the table, our budget director for the town, Linda Gardner, who's at the round table over here. To my right, my far right, is Mr. Bob Stone, Mr. Ken Brockfeld, Mr. Mike Tetreault, and Mr. Jim Brown. I know Mr. Bolito will be joining us shortly, and Mr. Kiley sends his regrets. He had a family situation come up and he can't be here this morning. I'd also like to recognize that there's several public officials from other boards in the town. I know there's a scattering of RTM members. I know State Representative Kim Fawcett is here as well. We started this 3 years ago to ensure that our board has a dialogue with the townspeople relative to the budget. Now, we hold a series of about 12 hearings every year during the month of March on our budget. But those hearings are at night, and they typically start at about 7 p.m. and go from anywhere from 11 p.m. till midnight, depending on the topic and the discussion we have. And don't we have fun during that month? While we try to accommodate public comment, we understand that it's difficult for people to get there during those nights. We also understand it's a very late night for the people that do attend, which is the reason that several years ago, Kevin Kiley as chairman, myself as vice chairman, added this forum with the help of our colleagues, and we thank them for giving of their Saturday to come here, in addition to all those nights that they do the budget. A little bit about the budget process. The way the budget process for the town of Fairfield works is both the town side and the Board of Education side start working on their individual department budgets in the fall of last year and through January of this year. For the Board of Education, the Board of Education hears the proposed budget for the administration in late January. They approve that budget and send it along to Mr. Flato for inclusion in his budget. Mr. Flato then puts together with his department heads the budgets for what we refer to as the town side, which is essentially everything but the Board of Education. And he then presents that budget in late February to our board, to the Board of Selectmen, and to the townspeople. Within that budget, he also makes his own recommendation relative to the Board of Education budget. Okay? That budget is the budget that's been before us for the last month. We will take that budget with the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen will vote first, make any adjustments to the budget that come out of our hearings that they feel is appropriate. They recommend that budget back to us. We then would vote on that budget and send that budget to the RTM. Now, the RTM, during the month of April, will review that budget themselves, and their job is they can lower the budget. They cannot raise the budget. So whatever we do is as high as it'd go. They can lower it from that point, and they pass that budget in early May. The night after they pass it, it comes back to us, and we set the mill rate for the town. Now, Mr. Tetreault and I have done a couple of forums on a budget education process to alert the town people to help expand the dialogue as to what type of things are in our budget. One of the key points to our budget that I think it's important for townspeople to know is that 70% of the costs related to the annual budget are related to personnel costs. 70%. And those costs are contractual. And those contracts never come before our board. On the Board of Education, those contracts are approved by the Board of Education and sent to the RTM for their ratification. And on the town side, those contracts are negotiated by the first selectman with his team, and then they are sent on to the RTM for ratification. The Board of Finance does not play a role within those contract negotiations or within those provisions. But we're required by statute to fund the costs of those contracts. And that represents 70% of the budget. Another 10% of your budget is debt service. Now, that 10% of the budget has been relatively consistent, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of that percentage, within 1 or 2 percentage points over the past number of years, since we went through the large building projects about 6 to 10 years ago, whatever that number was. Okay? So that's the vast majority of the budget, and that's where we stand. I don't want to talk too much. What I'd like to do is turn it over to you. It's your time to talk. I'd ask that you come up to the podium. You introduce yourself into the microphone, your name and where you live, and then feel free to comment. We typically do not take questions, but we might respond to certain things that you say for a clarification or things of that sort. We would also then, at the end, I think each member would probably have something to say in response to what we hear today. All right? I thank you all for coming. I thank you for working with us in this budget process, and I thank you for your interest. So with that, I'll turn over the floor to you all at the podium. Would you please do us a favor as well? There's a sheet up there, and if you would please sign your name to that sheet as legible as you can. That'd be great.
I'll print.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. It's on. I'm here tonight to talk about non-public school bus transportation. I did attend some of the meetings at night, but they were adjourned at 11:15 p.m. and our line item didn't get addressed. And then the subsequent evening, your plate was full with capital project issues. So I'm here on behalf of St. Thomas Aquinas School. My name is Kathy Napolitano. I live at 120 Hoydens Lane in Fairfield. I'm going to read you a letter on behalf of the principal and the school. My words to you tonight, I'll change that to today, are done so with the support and approval of our principal, Patricia Brady. Ms. Brady is not available to attend the meeting due to commitments at our school. First, we want you to know how grateful we are for the bus transportation that's currently provided to St. Thomas Aquinas School. We are requesting that the town of Fairfield continue to support non-public school bus transportation. We live and commute with the public school members of our town, and it is important when changes are made at one level, they do not adversely affect the rest of the community. For those members who recall September of 2006, our roads were highly congested due to start time changes at our high schools. These start time and dismissal changes disrupted the entire community with traffic gridlock within our town. We commend the Board of Education for saving our taxpayers some money within the transportation line item this year with this budget. At St. Thomas Aquinas, we have over 200 families that support the public school system in Fairfield, though for many, many reasons, their children do not attend those schools. We understand the bus routes will require reconfiguration to meet these expected savings. As this project unfolds, we ask that you please maintain the safe parameters currently in place that provide the students at St. Thomas Aquinas a safe, healthy, and reasonable commute to and from school each day. As our enrollment is projected to increase by 33 students next year, at this point, and its enrollment is still, registrations are still changing, and it'll be finished in May. Please do not consider cutting any services to St. Thomas. Our students range in age from 5 to 13 years. We cannot have school pickup times prior to 7 a.m., which will place our very young students in harmful situations as they await the bus. Prior to 7 a.m., it's still dark, making visibility poor and increasing the risk of injury to the children who are waiting in the dark. And on a stormy day, the visibility and road conditions are both poor, adding to the risk the children must face. We are grateful for your assistance to maintain the current standard of service in non-public school bus transportation as our enrollment increases. Respectfully yours. Thank you. I do have copies of these letters that I'd just like to pass out to all the members of the board.
Sure. And thank you very much, and I'm sorry you had to sit through our meetings the other night.
That's okay. I find them. I'll pass that.
I'm Frank Rice, 126 Hulls Highway, Southport, and I was here from my annual pitch. I was at the meeting on Monday night that the Facilities Committee kind of carried the things away, and I decided I'd have mercy on you and save it until today. But the thing that we have a problem with is our compliance officer at the Inland Wetlands Agency. We had one, and those of you who have been on the commission board for a while know that I've been coming every year wanting a second compliance officer because we have an awful lot of work in that area. Our compliance officer resigned about, I guess it's over a year ago now, back in the fall, and it was never replaced. So today I'm looking for a individual compliance officer rather than a second one. I'll have to go back to start over again. And we have a very desperate, and I stress desperate need in our department for a compliance officer. Right now we have one person doing two jobs, working full-time as a compliance officer and full-time as our open space manager. So with that, I'll just say, give it some thought, and I'll see you next year.
My name is Joe Whitko. I live on Skytop Drive, and I've been paying property taxes in Fairfield for 49 years. Please note that my comments apply only to the school side of the proposed budget. We all know that you cannot tell the Board of Education where or how to spend the excessive millions of educational dollars being dumped into a black hole that is getting deeper and deeper with no bottom in sight. Let me give you an example. And since I'm not qualified to judge this particular element of the school system, I will refer to a letter written by Gerard Coulombe and sent to the Fairfield Citizen editor about 2 years ago. Mr. Coulombe is a Fairfield resident and was previously in a top administrative position with a high school in another school district. Based on his experiences, Mr. Coulombe says in his letter, and I quote, "The way to cut a school budget is to start cutting school administrators." And he continues, "Curriculum supervisors, one for each discipline, are a luxury and truly unnecessary." This same position, expressing no need for curriculum leaders, is supported by some of Fairfield teachers and further confirmed by the $50,000 school audit, which could save $5 million, but which for the most part is being totally ignored by school officials. Our schools presently employ 6 curriculum leaders with an average salary of $125,000 and a proposed increase of $4,000, bringing it to a total of $129,000 each. And if I read the school budget correctly, there is also a director of curriculum instructions and assessment at a salary of $153,000. If benefits are included, the total cost is about $1 million for 7 people in positions that are hard to justify. Please consider Mr. Coulombe's comments. Also, listen to Fairfield's concerned teachers and read the neglected school audit. Please take action now to correct at least this one redundant and extravagant school expense among many others. Thank you.
second that. I'm going to go into more generalities. Looking at the history. Oh, you can't hear. My name is Thomas Hodgman. I live up on Sasco Hill Road. I've been here for about 26 years. And every year we face the same problem: higher taxes, higher taxes. I'm going to refer mainly to the school budget, which is proposed at plus 4.9%, of which some of the leading items are the fringe benefits, health, and also the retirement funds, each of which is up over 10%. I don't know who pays what, but it seems extraordinary that we keep getting burdened with that, and what I've seen is the future will give us no relief. Looking at the history of Fairfield, we're one of the population over the last 10 years is up 4.9%. We're up about 3.6. White people are actually, over the last 10 years, slightly lower, but basically flat, which means a lot of these people are voting with their feet to get out, and I'm among one of those considering that. The idea of whoever's to blame, I think of a 4.9% increase to me in this environment is absurd. It's an absurdly high number, and I can think of attrition and control that could be employed here to reduce the budget and at least flatline it. So with that, I'll let somebody else have the floor who may be more articulate than I am. But at any rate, I think we've got to relook at the whole situation and looking at the environment. 3% unemployment, I think 10 years ago, 9% today in the private sector. I think this is something that calls for an environment that's very dangerous. And here we have a new governor who wants to raise 60 taxes. I mean, where does it end? And I ask the Board of Finance, people in control of this, to take a second look and at least give us a break from the ever-increasing taxation. Thank you. Somebody else?
Good morning. I'm Laura Roberts. I live at 580 Katona Drive in Fairfield, and my heart is pounding. I moved here 17 years ago. I have 2 children in the Fairfield public school system. My husband... Is that better? When my husband and I were making a decision where to move and raise a family, we looked everywhere. We were commuting to New York and living down there, and we were trying to decide what would be appropriate. And one of the things we looked at is, where can we raise a family? Where are the schools of a good quality, and where can we have a wonderful quality of life? And we chose Fairfield, and we've been very happy to be here, and we've been very happy with the school system, and we would like that happiness to continue. And providing the resources for the children that are there is not a black hole. Providing the resources to the children that are there are needed. We ask that you pass the Board of Ed budget as presented. A lot of time and effort went into reconfiguring it so that it's fairly transparent and easy to follow. The resources outlined in the budget are prudent and they're necessary, and please pass it as presented. Thank you.
Good morning. Ann Stamler. I am with the RTM District 5. My reading glasses are about to dissolve, so you may be spared some details, because if they do, I can't read my notes. First of all, as I have before, I just want to express again my respect and appreciation for the level of time, and professionalism that this board devotes to our town's budget. I have walked with you through every hour of the hearings, but I know there are many, many hours that you devote in addition to that. And also for the bipartisan tone of these deliberations. I am aware that 70% of our budget is personnel. That doesn't, and most of it contractual. I don't think that means that cannot be addressed, however. So I just want to raise that issue, that personnel, although it is contractual, can on an ongoing basis be held in mind as something to address. One thing that has come to my attention this year, it's always been there, but I have not realized it before, is how much of the town side budget is expense for Board of Education or education projects and items. For example, it's a very small thing, but the unemployment line in the town budget, which is under the Board of Finance and is budgeted for next year at $170,000, I understand from the Chief Fiscal Officer is about 50% for Board of Education personnel unemployment expense. That's a small line item, but when you turn to capital projects, of the reduced number of capital projects that we have finally come to just this week, I believe the final number was 2.16, is that correct? 2.16 million? I didn't have my book with me this morning, so it was either 2.16 or 2.61. I believe 2.16. Out of that, 935,000 is for education projects. That's 43% of the capital project line. At that level, we are not seeing a 4.9% increase on the town side, or rather on the education side. We are seeing a much higher increase. If you attribute the expenses on the town side that are really for education, I am not criticizing that, but what I am recommending is that going forward, perhaps there's some way that the Board of Finance could have a calculation before it in future deliberations of how much of the town side budget is for education expenses, so that the public can understand how much this town is truly spending on what. Again, I'm not criticizing this, and I'm not saying that it should be less. I'm saying that we should realize what our expenses are for. And the only other thing I want to mention is at one point during the hearings, the spokesperson for We the People addressed the fact that these hearings take place late at night, and that often there are people who cannot stay the full time or cannot even attend. And full disclosure, obviously I'm a senior. I also work full time, so I do have pressures on my time, as do many others. It's, I believe, a great asset that cable TV is recording and making these deliberations available to people who cannot attend. So I just wanted to raise that in partial response to the comments that were made that evening. Thank you very much.
I should note at this point that we have been joined by our first selectman. He is in the audience with you. He walked in a little bit late, but he's here. There you go, exactly.
Excuse me. My name is Mark Goldstein. I live in Hemlock Road. A couple of points I want to make. First of all, I'm not familiar with the budgetary process here, even though unfortunately I've lived, or fortunately I should say, I've lived in the town for 30 years. The suggestion, handing out one of those things, useless, absolutely useless. I tried to go through it to understand what was going on, and unfortunately, not being a finance type or an accountant or familiar with the budgetary process, I couldn't make heads or tails. what I would suggest doing is giving out 2 charts, pie charts, spread over, let's say, the past 5 years. Source of and application of funds. Where's the money coming from? Where's it going? And on the application of funds, the number of employees and the number of Fairfield residents. That, by the way, is courtesy of a pie chart that Senator McKinney handed out at his budgetary meeting last week. And if you excuse me if I get a little emotional, I'm more emotional than some of the other speakers, but I am just fuming. Economy's in the toilet. People are out of work. People are losing their homes. You know what my kid's goal in life is? To get out of Connecticut and get out of Fairfield because they can't afford to live here anymore. Connecticut, I believe, is one of the well, unfortunately, it's not a good thing to say. Connecticut is one of the highest states to live in, cost of living in the country. And what I'm finding is both at the state level and the city level, there's a knee-jerk reaction. You have a deficit. What do? You look to save pennies, and then you turn around and you raise taxes. I can't afford it anymore. What I'm kind of looking for, and I mentioned this at the state budget meeting, I think it's time for some creative thinking. What do I mean by creative thinking? I had the opportunity to use our library over an extended period of time during a job hunt. We have a great library system. Okay, people are great, a lot of books there, people are very helpful. I also had the opportunity to do the same thing in Westport. People are great, great library system. Riding home one day, I happened to think to myself, you know, we have a librarian in Westport, I don't know who or she is, probably making into the 6 figures. We have a book purchaser probably pushing $100,000. We have a retired gentleman, a couple of retired gentlemen in Fairfield that were loading books into a cart. And they wheel it out to a city-owned car, and they take off. And I happened to ask one of the clerks there, what's that guy doing? The answer is, well, he's taking books that are turned in here and returning them to Westport or returning them to the other library. I was in Westport. You know, they had the same thing going. Dawned on me, we have a number of homogeneous towns around here. Fairfield, Easton, Reading, Westport, New Canaan, Darien. Why do we really need 2 separate library systems? Why can't we consolidate? In fact, I took it a step further, and I said, you know, we have a fantastic school system. The future of this town and our state and this country is our kids. Westport also has a fantastic school system. So do some of the other surrounding towns. We have a superintendent of schools that's making, what, $200,000, $300,000 a year? Why can't we combine school systems? If you can take it another step further, or maybe you can do the same thing with the police department, Department of Public Services. I don't know. Okay, will it work? Will it not work? Is anybody really looking at it? That's what I mean by creative thinking. I happened to hear on the radio coming in a couple of weeks ago in Ossining, New York, home of the infamous Sing Sing prison, they've done away with their police department. Why? They combine their policing services with the county of Westchester. They're saving the town $600,000 a year by combining police departments. That's what I mean by creative thinking. Will that work? I don't have the slightest idea. But I'd just like to have somebody take a look at it. One more comment, if I understood something that you said at the opening remarks, something like 80 or 90% of our budget is cast in concrete. Was that true?
I did not say cast in concrete. I said that it was 70% of it was compensation related. So there were people costs.
Contracts.
They were contracts, but you can't adjust the number of people.
Okay.
Okay? And then 10% is concrete. That's your debt service. Okay?
All right. The only thing I'm asking you to do is, again, please just use some creative thinking and bearing in mind that, again, when our kids can't afford to live here anymore, we've got some serious troubles. And you just can't continue to raise taxes the way you have been. Thank you.
Sir, thank you for your comments. And regarding your comments on the budget book, I don't know that this will completely answer your question, but I believe I think we're looking at the same budget book, which is the orange book, the proposed budget that I think, Mr. Hiller, you had to pass out. If you look at page 12 of that, it might get you a little bit closer, at least for the past couple of years, as to the sources and uses of some of the funds on some global line items, okay? So that might help just a little bit. So thank you.
Good morning. I'm Elaine Davis, 206 Farmington Avenue, and I'm the budget representative for Fairfield Woods Middle School and Tomlinson Middle School right here in town. I'd like to address you this morning about looking at the history. When was the last time any of you looked at the history of the budgetary process in Fairfield? Back about, almost 30 years ago, in the 80s, Fairfield was faced with a similar circumstance. School budgets were being cut, taxes were going up, and what happened? Our schools lost many of its great programs: music, art, foreign language on the elementary level. Buildings fell into disrepair. It took about 25 years to bring us back up to the level we're at now. Unfortunately, I see the pendulum going back to the way things were in the 80s. We don't want to see that happen again. It's kind of a trickle-down effect. You start having layoffs, who suffers? Not only the people in the educational system, not only our kids, but also people in our town, our shop owners, our restaurants, our clothing stores. You start with one, it trickles down to the other. Anyhow, I just want to ask you this morning to please look at the history as you're making these deliberations. Look at where we've been, look at where we're going, and please support the education budget as it stands. Dr. Title has done a thoughtful and thorough job in preparing this budget. And again, thank you for your thoughtfulness. Good day.
David McKenzie. Mike. I live on Merwin's Lane, been here 32 years. And I'm really just getting into this budget process, and I have a lot of respect for the people that work for the town putting this together. But I have concerns like other people who have been here. One, for example, the gentleman who spoke before, I can't get through the budget and understand it. And it seems to me, if we're really interested in having transparency, that we'd have an executive overview of the budget for general consumption, which would include metrics such as teachers per student, administrators per teacher, comparing us to other towns, which may be totally correct the way things are done now, but I don't know it. And I can't go through, well, I got the first budget, which was about an inch thick, and I looked through it and I noticed the education wasn't in there. It has its own separate book. And you'd have to devote full time to really understand all that. So I think an executive overview. I was told on the website that you can get the metrics, the measurements, and I've been to the website, and it has a lot of good things, but the metrics aren't readily seen, nor is the budget. That's, for some reason, that page isn't available. I noticed on the growth in pension fund, 8% has been used. The explanation was that half the people in our in our state apparently use that number. It's a crazy number. It may have been okay when Madoff, who had a regular 10% a year, was part of our investments, but we found out that was a scam. And the S&P has been flat for the last 10 years. And what we're doing with an 8% projection is crazy. Plus the fact that if we're underfunded on pensions now, if you used a realistic number, we're way underfunded, which is a rabbit punch that's going to come and hit us even more if we change nothing in the rest of the budget. Healthcare is up 24%, and we know that that's impossible, but we've got to do something about it. We know it's out there, so we have to change it. And it's been said here before that there's no recognition of when is enough. And my concern is we've approached the budget from the bottom down. And as I say, I think they're good people putting this together with good ideas and good intentions. But you will always find that you'll run out of money pretty fast when you go that approach. You can't do that at home on your own budget. You say, I have this much coming in, I can afford this much. We don't approach it that way in the town. What we would I'd like to see is a statement that says, look, we're going to keep the budget flat this year, and therefore the key departments have a job. If we have to go down 4.9%, you decide within your area how to do that. And I don't care how you do it, but it can be solved. It's a different approach. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Mary Hogue. I live at 165 Stonewall Lane, and I'm a parent of students in the public school system. I'm not very good at this. I don't know how to do this. Is this good? I have been trying very mightily to keep up with all that you do with the budget and the budget itself. It is incredibly complex. There are so many variables. And I have looked at the numbers and tried to compare them to other towns and tried to understand how it all fits. And then I ask questions and I find out that there's reasons behind it. And when you look at matrices and you look at comparisons, comparing, for instance, pupil to teacher or administrative ratios may or may not be the best thing because you want to find out how the results are. And finding one version of statistics may not be counting everything that some else is. So it's very frustrating. It's very confusing. And yes, I do agree that the budget, it would be great to have an executive summary, but having all these background information is also very important in understanding how things fit. As someone said, that they're all related. And the idea that cutting one budget affects the real estate value, for instance, which could then affect people moving in, which could affect tax base and so forth. Having a flat budget would be ideal, except there are these things like the personnel contracts and the other contracts that are escalating. How do we do that? Are we willing to sacrifice services? And how do we have our priorities set in our town? In the audit, for instance, the curriculum leaders, the audit says we should have one more, not less. So obviously there are people in this audience that don't agree with the audit. I think it's important to note that this town is like most towns, if not even less, in terms of the percentage going to education for this year's budget. I think it's important to realize that education, whether you make use of the education that's provided in the public system or not, has a very strong effect and correlation to how well and healthy the town is and how it's perceived. So I applaud you and I thank you very much for taking all these complexities and putting them in and not just looking at the numbers, because the numbers aren't going to tell us everything we need to know. And interpreting for that, for us, I think it's important. If we could figure out a way to do that in an executive summary way, that would be wonderful. That would be so amazing. I don't know how you do that. I'd love to know. I'd love to see it. But I thank you very much for providing this forum and for allowing all of us to come and tell you how we feel. So thank you.
Morning. Name's Bob McGuffey. Live on Mayweed Road in Fairfield. I've lived here about 17 years. And like many of us, I've had to live a busy business life, and I've watched the town go along for the last 17 years and haven't gotten very involved. But the last couple of years, I most assuredly have. And if we look at what's going on in our nation's capital, this country's at a crossroads. And we may all go home from here and say, well, those were nice speeches in this room here. It is. There's over $1 trillion deficit annually that this government in Washington has put forward, and there's hardly a soul in our political class willing to address that realistically. They're all just putting it to us, and they're full of it. And they think we're not watching, and they think we're not going to do anything about it, and they think we're not going to stand up for somebody that's willing to cut and to put the house back in order. But they're wrong. And there are people all over this country like myself that have come out, and we're not going to go home until we start getting some action and straight answers. Now this country, the taxpayers of this country send enough money to Washington, they send enough money to Hartford, and they send enough money into Fairfield to do what we need done. And we look at this book here, and we look at the skyrocketing costs in there, and I listen to an inoculation statement from yourselves here that much of this is out of your hands and it's in contracts. And, you know, what are we supposed to do about that? And then I hear people coming to this microphone this morning asking that things get funded and keep going forward. And I hear the sob stories, and I hear all of the it's for the kids and it's for education. Money does not equal education. And if they want to write the contracts in such a way that if the belt gets tightened, you have to throw out the new, good, young, talented, aggressive teachers because they're the newest, but keep the old ones hanging on till retirement in there because they're the oldest, there's something wrong with that system, folks. And everyone in this room knows that. That has to get changed. You folks may not be the forum on this particular Saturday morning. The people are in this room that know that. And so we get told, you don't want to fire teachers. No, I don't want to fire teachers. You know, cut back on salary. Everybody take a cut. Slide back. In private business, a business looks at its market and it's having trouble. They look to find efficiencies to do things better. We all know that. We all work in those corporations. And the private manager has to figure out a way to do it better. There doesn't seem to be those types of pressures on public administrators. But you have to find a way, or we're all doomed. We are doomed. We're going to bankrupt the nation. We're going to bankrupt the state. Mr. Malloy is out in town halls telling us we've got to take another $1.5 billion in tax increases. People and businesses are already leaving the state, and we all know that because we know them. And now you're going to raise taxes further and chase more people out of both this fine community and this state because the people that we elect are unwilling to make the tough decisions. They must be made. And I would ask you folks there to dig in and really do what needs to be done. I grew up in Flushing, Queens. There were 72 kids in my grammar school class from first grade to 7th. In the 8th, they split it in half. We all got the education. We all learned it. We were doing algebra coming out of grammar school. We went into high school. We did fine. We cannot stand for this teacher-student ratio and all of these shibboleths that are put in front of us, all these red herrings, all these human shields they're all hiding behind. Malloy has the audacity to stand there in front of me in Bridgeport and say, I'm not going to balance the budget on the back of the needy. And I'm supposed to react to that? Does he think he's in a junior high school debating class? We all know that that's not what's going to happen. We're not going to cut from people that really need it. How about we grow up and scale it back? And I am expressing the sentiments, I think, of many, many people in this state and in this nation. And unfortunately, this is going on at every level, and you know it, and we know it. And I would just ask that you really consider it. And as you're driving home from this meeting, you don't start thinking, well, that's great, I got rid of those folks. Really think of what's been said to you here today. Because if we don't get on it, we're all doomed. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kate Daniello. I am the co-founder of We the People of Fairfield. I live at 490 Shrub Oak Lane. I'd like to echo the gentleman who said it is getting so that we can't afford to live here. Our children can't afford to come back and live here. Many of the seniors that are We the People supporters have said exactly that to me, and they feel as though the taxes are running them out of town. Why are the seniors having trouble? Because they are on a fixed income. If they are getting just Social Security, that Social Security has not increased since 2008 because it is tied to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. If that does not go up, which it has not, then their benefits do not go up. Their request to you, through me, is to put the Board of Ed on a fixed budget. Okay? Now, there was another person who came up and talked about the trickle-down effect if we were to cut the Board of Ed budget. Okay? I want you to know that none of our supporters are looking to destroy our educational system. We feel that a good educational system is what supports our property values. However, we do feel as though there is room in that budget to cut and still have a very good system. There's no one of our supporters that believes throwing money at a system is what improves it. What will improve our educational system, and Dr. Title is behind this, is parents who motivate their children and support their children, and the children, you know, trying to do the best they can in the classrooms, and really good teachers who are motivating and supporting those students. That is what makes a good school system, not a ton of money. So the trickle-down effect, which this person spoke of, can have the reversed effect. If you continue to increase taxes, what's going to happen is the seniors will move out of town. The people who will replace them will have children. That will overcrowd our school systems, okay? The smaller business person will move out of town. What will replace them is the mega stores. What you will pay in those mega stores will be much higher than what that small business would have provided for you, okay? I agree with Mary Hogue, who's the PTA president, that supporting our school systems is very important. And we the people is here to support them. However, an independent operational audit done by both the town and the educational system proved that there are ways to save money in this budget. One of the bigger suggestions of the audit report by Prismatic Systems was to eliminate the house system at the two high schools. According to the report, this would save $1.6 million. Dr. Title said unemployment costs were not considered, and the amount is more like $1.4 million. Fairfield has the luxury of having 2 high schools with 1,400 students each. The town of Greenwich has 1 high school housing 3,000 students. 1 high school was good enough for Greenwich, but not Fairfield. We, the people, feel we can't have it both ways on the backs of the taxpayer. I agree also with Bob McGuffey, who stood up here and said the class sizes could be adjusted when we have these temporary blips in overcrowding in our schools. I myself came from a school system that had 30 classmates in it. It did not hinder my ability to learn in that class. I understand that today it's a lot different. The students are coming with perhaps problems where an additional person in the classroom is very helpful in helping that teacher provide instruction to all the students if that additional person is going around. I myself have a child with ADHD. I know the resources in our school system that helped him to succeed. We are not looking to cut those kinds of resources, but I cannot believe there aren't other areas, and certainly the Prismatic Independent Operational Audit indicated that there are other areas we can cut. So I have to ask you to please consider this. And we the peoples has always asked for a zero increase. And we know that this is really difficult, but we are begging you to get as close to it as you possibly can. Thank you.
Howdy, my name's Steve Shepard. Lived here most of my life. Just wanted to mention a couple quick things. Population today is the same as it was in 1980. I remember as a young kid, this was a great school for kids, and it's all built cinder block and a pretty simple school. Since that time period, we've built these glass, state-of-the-art schools, which look beautiful, wonderful. They might be harder to take care of, more expensive to take care of, but we all seem to have a great education out of a cinder block bunker, as I used to call them. I'd send a message to the Board of Ed. I'd get them out of that fancy rent that they pay, that fancy building, stick them into some place like the old Army Reserve or something that we own, so we don't pay rent. Get them into some, Another thing I just want to quickly stop bonding non-essential items, skateboard parks, women's softball fields. They would be lovely to have. Love to have a hockey rink. I'd love to have grass tennis courts. I'd love to have a lot of things. But at this time period, for 300 girls, they're 14 and under, having a designated park, we're going to bond it. We already bonded a liability as a skateboard park. I mean, I think these non-essential items have just got to go. That's it. Thank you.
First of all, apologies because I'm not a good speaker and I missed a cup of coffee this morning. David Adnet, 165 Hemlock Hill South in Fairfield. I just want to mention a few things and reinforce a few things that previous speakers have said. And some of them are very appropriate to me and my household right now. First of all, regarding the 70%, my opinion is something has to be done about it. Simple as that. Do something about it. Sorry, did you hear what I previously said? Okay. I've got my own business. I moved here from, you can guess where, in 1985. and started my own business in 1994. Business was doing really well, as was the country in the 2000s until the crunch. Now, we're in, let's say, printing and publishing, and we all know what has happened to that for various reasons. Our Borders in the town has been saved, but in fact, they may be closing another 125 stores, so we don't know. But you can't sell to people who are not buying for financial reasons and for reasons that are happening in the country. It's impossible. Now, in the last 3 years, we including myself, there's only 4 of us, but in the last 3 years, our sales have dropped from 5.755 million in 2008 to 3.568 million in 2009. That's a 38% drop. To 2.619 million last year. That's a further 26%. We still employ 4 people, including myself. But the only way we've done that is severely reduce all our costs, including cutting salaries. They've been cut by 25%. All benefits have been cut. Healthcare has been renegotiated. We're doing it, and I think it should be applied. That thought needs to be applied, because I'm not the only person in the town who has had to do this. I don't know whether you're aware of the statistics of the town regarding the people who are in financial difficulty. Probably not, and I'm not criticizing you for that, because I don't believe there's probably a way of finding that out. But it is what is happening in our town. I'm not going to criticize the school system, because my daughter graduated from Fairfield Ludlow High last year. Double majored at Villanova and now works in Manhattan. So there's nothing that I'm going to criticize about the school system. But what I'm going to say is freeze it. Freeze the budget. Find a way. I think if everybody is told, we had to tell ourselves, cut our costs or go out of business. If everybody is told this is not the right climate to do it, there will be a way to do it. Gentleman over here said about the national level. Well, yeah. As a country, technically, we are bust. There's enough reading available to people to know that. Never listen to a politician, of course. But for instance, you know, our budget balances as a percentage of gross domestic product here in the United States are minus 8.8%. In Mexico, they're minus 2.1. In Canada, they're minus 2.3. In Greece, and I'm sure a lot of you have been reading about the debt crisis in Europe. In Greece, it's minus 8.1. It's actually less than ours. So we can't pretend in this country we do not have a big financial problem. A few other things that I wanted to mention are just things that I've read recently, in fact. In The Economist, I'll get back to that because whatever. Yesterday, article on Yahoo Finance. It's very true about what a recent colleague said about Social Security. But at the same time, those people who are on Social Security are paying higher prices for food, gas, utilities, insurance, and health care. And we're asking them to pay more for the taxes in the town that they live in. In all honesty, we are considering moving out, and almost certainly will. Exactly when, I don't know. But we have a close friend and neighbor in Burr Street who is actually in the process of doing that, because she said, enough's enough. Right, what else did I want to say? It's true, I think, that smaller businesses are moving out of town. But also you can see what's happening in the town. Good restaurants are going. People can't afford to go there. It's happening all the time. It's been happening for ages and ages and ages. Even some of the banks are shutting their door. That wouldn't actually hurt because there's far too many of them in this town anyway. Somebody suggested that Black Rock Turnpike should be renamed Bank Rock Turnpike. But, you know, without going on to other things, healthcare is a major problem in this country. It's more than twice the percentage of gross domestic product than any other industrialized nation. And what's going to be done about it? Nothing, because nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to do anything about it. But I'm not criticizing that as such, although in fact I am, but what I'm saying, that is hurting people. It's hurting you in the town because you have to do something about it. You know, what do? You can't say to people you don't have health care anymore. But small businesses do have to say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to do something yourself. I think these are real issues, and I think absolutely, without question, this is not the right time to increase the budget at all. Thank you.
Okay, tough group. Sarah Janot, 115 Paulding Street. Over 100 years ago, my great-grandfather came to Fairfield, and we never left. Why have we stayed in the same square generation after generation? Certainly not because Fairfield is the same as it was all those years ago. I don't want to go back to the Fairfield of my childhood on Fairfield Beach Road that was garbage strewn and full of potholes. My father doesn't want to go back to the Fairfield of his childhood, when Fairfield Beach Road was a dirt road with some little shacks on it. His best buddy didn't have running water. We stayed in Fairfield because Fairfield keeps changing. Education has changed too. So much so, it doesn't even compare to the education I grew up with. Teachers back then, we remember, had the simple job of instilling in children a set of knowledge that we all needed to go forward and be successful as adults. Do you remember spending hours getting the slant just right on your cursive writing? Yeah, not anymore. When I was in 5th grade, the teacher may have stood in front of the class and taught us what an echo was. And we sat there and listened studiously. Today, my 5th grader, who has the exact same teacher I had at Sherman School, has to find the information on his own, understand it, write a report, a multimedia presentation with another child, work together. It's completely different. Our teachers didn't learn this way, and they didn't learn to teach this way, and they desperately need our help. Please, you have a lot of budget issues, but just please don't take away the support our teachers desperately need in a changing world where children continually will have to relearn and adapt through their entire lives. I just ask you to please support the Board of Ed budget. Please don't take my Fairfield backwards. I want Fairfield to be the place that my great-grandchildren will be proud to call home. Thank you.
Morning. My name is Bob Forcelina. I'm a co-founder with Kate Daniello of We the People. And I've been listening to the pros and cons here tonight of what really boils down to is higher taxes. And mainly the Board of Education I take out of this meeting. All the parents always come down and support their children, which I fully understand. And my boys both went through the Fairfield school system. They went on to college, and they got out of college, and they're doing very well, but now they both got unemployed all of a sudden because of the economy. They got laid off. Well, I've always said that the teachers, the police, and the firemen, and the city workers, town workers, have always been underpaid for years. They were always underpaid. I turned down a fireman's job in the town of Norwalk where I was born, because it didn't pay a lot. Well, as everybody here has said, things have changed. Some people like to change, some people don't. They're no longer underpaid. I'm not saying they're overpaid. All I'm saying is, how many teachers, police, or firemen would quit their job if this board locked their budget to this year or last year's budget and not give anybody a raise? How many people here think that a teacher making $100,000, a fireman making $100,000 is going to quit their job in this economy because they didn't get a raise? So all I want to say to you, I'm not saying they're doing this to us. We have all these people who do a great job. I've never said they haven't. But I just think with so many people out of work, how in the world would someone quit a job making $160,000 a year? They'd have to be out of their minds to leave that job. And I don't believe anybody should be let go, because if we just freeze their pays, which you can do, I don't think anybody's going to quit. So I think you should seriously consider. I've seen other committees about the bonding. They take away from the Board of Ed, but they put it in bonding over 10 years. They give them $450,000 the other night. I was at that meeting. It's insane. They take away, they cut their budget, and then they give it under capital improvements, and they bond it for 10 years. 10%, what is it, $25 million we pay in interest? How many points of the mill rate would go down if we didn't pay that $25 million? We got to stop mortgaging the town like the country did and the state and the country did. So just keep it in mind and ask yourself, would you quit that job if you didn't get a raise in pay this year? I doubt it. Thank you very much.
I know, the shirt's a dead giveaway, right? My name is Craig Roberts. I live at Katona Drive. My wife Laura spoke before. She asked me to come here and be nice, and I will. I respect everybody's opinion here, and they're all genuine. You could tell with the passion in their voices, and I respect what they've said here today. Somebody mentioned a big box store. When I think of the big box stores, they're cheaper, and they have a little bit of everything. Quality may not be what you'd want, which is why I hate them, and I like going to the local stores for two reasons. It's quality and service. Okay? 17 years ago, when we were looking for a place to live, we had two concerns: quality of life, education. We didn't look for the cheapest place to live. When today I work, young couples ask me about the town. I say, what's important to you? They give me the same answer I gave 17 years ago when people asked me. Quality of life, education. I'm from Long Island, Nassau County. My wife refused to marry me if I wanted to live in Long Island. She said, you got to come to Connecticut. I didn't even know anything about Connecticut. But what I do know is, if you want to freak out and see some taxes, go to Nassau County, Long Island. Okay? See what you get for a postage stamp house on top of the next one for your taxes. Yeah, the taxes here aren't cheap, okay? But it's quality and it's the education. And that's what people are still looking for today. And that's why I came here. My kids are in school, and I want it to stay that way. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Palma Senator. I live at 42 Pilgrim Lane, here in Fairfield, of course. I want to first thank you all for all that you do for this town and this budget process, which is completely overwhelming to me. Having said that, and having listened to many people here, I wanted to give you a little background. When I was 9, so I'm going to give away my age, 55 years ago, my parents moved us out of Brooklyn to come up here for a better life, for a good education, but my education was at St. Thomas. And, but we paid our taxes, and I shared a bedroom with my grandmother until I was 18 years old, at which I moved. Anyway, having said that, my education was good. The quality of life was great. However, I had the benefit of having not living in a bubble, but in a community where there were seniors, where there were people that were other than educating children and young couples. That's part of an education I believe our kids need today. I know you can't, in a sense, determine from the budget what the board can change or take away. But they live in a bubble. Pardon me? I'm sorry, the Board of Education's budget. I feel, though, they live in such a bubble, and that this idea that there are more than just these 17% of our population we need to educate, when there's 23.6% of our 60 and over who get a trickling amount of money from this town and whose very backs these kids are being educated on. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and I love the idea of education. And my children are teachers. But this is gotten to a point where the amount of money being spent for children in this town so far outweighs the reality of the necessities of buildings, having nothing to do with teachers, but the expenses that are put out today on the backs of people who've lived in this town for 60 or more years, and they get approximately, because I called to try and get the numbers, $3 million, maybe a little more, of benefits in this town. There's something very, very wrong, because you want to keep the people here that are saying our children, our children. I love children. But you know what? The seniors in this town deserve more than they're getting. And I think the education of these children should show that they should give something up for the people who's paying for them and have paid through the years to be in this town. I apologize for being this passionate, but maybe that's because I slept in the same room with my grandmother for all those years. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Gaylord Meyer. I live at 51 Spruce Street, Southport, Connecticut. And first I'd like to say thank you for showing up on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, because I also know you have full-time jobs. And you do not get paid for this job or this abuse. So I'm just going to pile it on. I think, first of all, based on what Dr. Clark said at the 2010 budget, the Board of Education, that the statistics are in this town that we have a fabulous school. Our kids are up in math, they're up in English, and they're up in science, and that's when they were looking for a $4 million increase in their budget. And when I said to Dr. Clark, I said, if you can do that on the existing budget, why do you need $4 million more? Turns out that a lot of that was capital expenditures, which takes me to one of my bone of contentions, and I'm hoping as town representatives and their selectmen that maybe the public is not aware of this, that when the Board of Education submits their budget, they have capital expenditures that are in there, and they get to hire their own contractors. It's my understanding. And we have had brand new schools that have been built, and a year to 3 years later, they're coming back asking for more money because there's something majorly wrong with construction. I would like to see, if it's possible, and this goes back to the arbitration, that changes so that these contractors that we seem to keep, I don't know about you, but if I have a painter who shows up and does a crappy job, I don't hire him again. If I have a plumber who doesn't constructively repipe my house the proper way, why would I hire him again? It's called stupidity. The definition of insanity is repeating it over and over again, expecting a different outcome. We need to have a no-call list. And I don't know how that happens, whether the town or through arbitration. I don't know how that happens. But that's got to change, because we have brand-new schools, i.e. Cedar. Cedar doesn't rot in 3 years, but for some reason, Cedar rotted this year. The other thing that I have a really tough time and hoping that we can change this is that we're now, when these contracts with municipal, 70% of our budget is on municipal spending. These contracts, not 70%.
70%
of the budget
is overall compensation-related costs of
Correct.
the town budget.
Okay.
It's
Right.
not on municipal. That 70% number is globally, including both the town and the Board of Education.
Okay.
Those are personnel-related costs.
Correct. And those costs are arbitrated, if I understand correctly, through our selectmen.
They are negotiated, the town contracts are negotiated by the first selectman and a
Correct.
team he puts together.
Yes.
And then they are submitted to the RTM for ratification. On the Board of Education side, they're negotiated by a subcommittee of the Board of Education with their outside experts, and again ratified by the representative town meeting, the RTM.
Wonderful. I love the way you say that, and I hope everybody heard what you said. We are the taxpayers. We are the taxpayers for this arbitration, and we're not part of it. We have no input to that. None. That's got to change. And recently, I said, when you were doing the arbitration with the contractors for the fire and the police, things have changed. This is not 20, 30 years ago. Other towns and communities are in the same situation we are now. And you know what they're doing? They're firing everybody, letting them go, and they're subcontracting fire and police. And they're making lots of money, and everybody's happy. This is something that I don't want to see, but it's something we may have to consider as a town because we can't keep going the way we're going. The other thing that I would like to talk about real quick, and I'll be brief, is that this, the Board of Ed has the additional $25 million of unfunded health and welfare. How are we going to fund that? Where is that money going to come from? Are you going to bond that one too? I believe in education. There's not a person in this room that doesn't. But you know what? Time is time, and it's called 0, 0, no increase. Not this year. And I know you're tired of hearing me say that because I come up and I say it every year. And you're not listening. Have a good day.
Thank you, Gaylord. I do want to make one small comment on your remarks, only because I want to make sure it's fair to the Board of Education. Related to the school building projects and the schools that were built, and then the fact that there's been problems with them years after they were built, please note that those building committees and those projects were under the administration of the town. They get turned over to the Board of Education only after they're completed. So I just want to be fair to them, okay, that they're turned over to the those buildings are built by the town side. The building committees are impaneled by, I believe, the First Selectman and the Board of Selectmen, right, Mr. Flato? Right? And the RTM ratifies those. I'm not debating the comment. I just want to make sure that it's not, I wouldn't want the Board of Education to be part of that. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. How you all doing? First of all, I did speak 2 years ago. I didn't last year, so I figured I should rotate every other year. I think this is a very healthy exercise, and it's important, and the Board of Finance absolutely should be commended for doing this. I wanted to touch on a couple of factual things to correct them, and then just give some big picture thoughts for a couple of minutes, if that's okay. First of all, regarding buildings, just for the record, there's been about $120 million of buildings, 5 schools renovated, 3 new schools, and if there's a couple $100,000 of repairs 8 years after that building opens, that's not too bad. Those building committees worked awfully darn hard, and they've done, for the most part, an incredible job trying to make sure that we have good facilities in this town. And those of you that know what the old facilities were like and how much repairs and maintenance was being wasted in those old facilities before they were upgraded know that we've gotten plenty of bang for our buck. But again, if we don't know about a problem for 8 years, there's not much we can do about it under an old contract with a vendor. Second, than just factual things, the Board of Ed headquarters, perfect example. We don't pay rent, guys. We negotiated a deal to buy part of a building. I actually came up with that idea to buy part of a building 10 years ago. There is no rent. We've had it rent-free for the last 10 years, and we invested $3 million in that space. And if the owner wants to take the space back, they have to pay us today 20% more than we bought it for, $4.6 million. So for 20,000 square feet of space, we've saved, the average square foot rent in this town is $20, $30, $40. We've saved $500,000 a year every year for the last 10 years. So I'd like to correct that statement. More importantly, we come here each year and there's some real passionate, opinions on both sides of spending, non-spending, the need for programs. I think it's important to note that the last 2 years, these town boards have actually brought in the lowest budgets in the last 30 or 40 years if you take a 2-year combined total. So all of us have had negligible tax change over the last 2 years. And anybody who doesn't believe that, please look at your tax bill over the last 2 years. Yes, there's been a little over 1% average increase, and yes, we would have loved to have seen it at 0, but the fact is that's the lowest change in the last 30 years. The other thing that I think that is a misnomer and people need to understand is that 60–70% of the cost of the budgets are compensation related. Town side, we have an roughly $88 million budget. There's roughly $35 million of salaries for about 470 people. That's an average salary of about $60,000, $55,000. Some are making 80 or 90, some are making 30 or 40. The benefits are about 30% on top of that. So when you add the benefits in, yes, it's the majority of the budget. The law states, it's not my choice, the law states, and we live under a nation of laws, that collective bargaining is a requirement in this state. I could just say, hey, let's do 0%. That's what I did last year. And guess what? 5 out of 7 contracts have not yet been renegotiated. 2 contracts were with a 0% increase this year and a 2% increase the year after, and major health insurance givebacks. And the RTM said, well, we want a 401k pension for new employees, so they turned it down. But those employees under the law have a right to go to arbitration and have a right to ask for more, and we have a right to ask for less, and we have no way of knowing whether we will win or lose. But I can tell you that the law states that the result is based on arbitration, based on like contracts, and based on what a community can afford to pay its employees. And Fairfield, in the wealth factor, our town, the average employee makes 50% of the average resident of this town today. That's a fact. Okay, that's not, I'm not talking about seniors, I'm talking about the average resident per capita income versus our average employee per capita income. Secondly, so they look at that. They also look at what other communities pay. And many communities have negotiated, just as I have, a 0% for a year. But the next year is 2%, and the next year is 3%. Every contract in the state. There has not been one yet that has had double years of zeros. So no arbitrator is going to make our employees take 2 years of zeros, because that's what, under state law, they're required to arbitrate. And so those of you that think, well, we can just click our fingers and, give nothing, the process doesn't work that way. As much as some of us would like to say, hey, we need to afford 2 years of 0%. So I just need to explain that it's not as easy as it sounds. The other quick thing I thought would be hopefully helpful to say is that, and many of you grew up in our fine town, but I think you have to admit that the quality of life has never been better. So we do get a lot of bang for our bucks and for our services. We do have some of the finest police and fire services in the country. And yes, we could cut that back. We could close a firehouse. It wouldn't save very much money, but we could close a firehouse. We could close our branch library. There are a lot of things we could do. I don't think this community would stand for those kind of cuts. The level of things that one can control as a manager is much more limited than a private company, where a head of the private company can just say, sorry, I'm closing my doors, or sorry, you can't get a raise. It's a lot more complicated. And anybody who would like to individually come in for 15, 20 minutes and let me give you more detail, call my office. We've always done that. I'm happy to do that. Finally, I think there are two last things that would be very helpful, and I will try to do this, if it's okay with the chair, over the next week. I think we could, it would be really good, I put out an executive summary for the town budget, but it doesn't have a 5-year analysis. The budget book does. It shows how much revenue has changed over the last 5 years for every revenue line. It shows how much expense side has changed for the last 5 years on the town side. I don't think the Board of Ed has a 5-year picture in their book, but I think what we could do is try to put a 5-year summary up with some information and some kind of per employee costs and things like that, so people can get a better sense of that. And the last thing is, thank you for trying to educate yourselves. I know it's hard to go to those nighttime meetings, but I think many of you are trying to get information off the website and off the budget books, and I really think that's important, so I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
I know it's not a question and answer, but around the country, we've seen governors take negotiation of pensions and health care out of collective bargaining. And so my question is, what can we do to take that important piece out of collective bargaining and leave salaries under that aegis?
Before, we're starting to get some repeat speakers. I just want to make sure we're fair to all. Is there, and please don't take offense. Is there anybody else who hasn't had the opportunity who would like to say something?
Hi, my name is Larry Kennedy. I live at Roberton Crossing. One thing I don't think I've heard tonight is the taxpayers are expected to make the sacrifice here, and I think what has to happen is it has to happen all over. The education budget can't be kept out of this. We all have to sacrifice. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joan Fortuna, and I live at 38 Pine Creek Avenue. And we do all have to sacrifice, and I'm willing to make my sacrifice, but I'm one of the few people in this town who just got their taxes raised. I have a garage across the street from my house. It was just reappraised for $100,000 more this year. That's my sacrifice. I think the rest of us should make some sacrifices too.
Can you?
No. I'll fix it, Virginia.
No. Virginia Sanford, Hillside Road. I agree what the woman said. My taxes have gone up, and we all, everybody, the Board of Education, schools, everybody has to take a cut. I just want to say one thing. My husband was the treasurer of Sloan. Can you hear me? Because I'm furious. As I said, why should my taxes go up? I get no service. I have no children. The roads in front of my house are a disgrace. I have potholes. Anyhow, I am furious about the whole thing. So my husband was the treasurer of Sloan Kettering a number of years ago. They had problems, and I'll tell you what they did. I'm not asking you to do. They reduced every expense by 10%. We're telling you that you should reduce the Board of Education, at least hold it. And there was no lack of service. So you can do something about reducing things and not giving up service. Also, as Steve Shepard said, the state of art of these schools are utterly ridiculous. You want the education, but they don't need those fancy buildings. Thank you.
Service people, are they Stan Scott's 97 Benson Place. I'd like to know if the school teachers and the police and firemen are unionized. They are. Thank you.
Christine Vitale, 254 Verna Hill Road. I moved to Fairfield 14 years ago. I didn't have any kids. I have 3 kids now. My youngest is at the Early Childhood Center. My oldest is going into high school next year, which I can't believe. But when I lived right on Hurd Street when I first moved to Fairfield, and downtown Fairfield, the Fairfield store had just closed. It was empty. Downtown was pretty depressing. So I look at town today, and I think about Borders, a big store that came in and I think kind of revitalized downtown. And this talk about no restaurants, it seems like either a new restaurant, a bank, or a pharmacy is opening up in this town. So I think our town is doing pretty good overall. Nobody wants their taxes raised. I don't care if you're 20 or you're 80. Nobody wants your taxes raised. But sometimes you have to pay to get things. It's just as simple as that. And I think that we're underestimating. It's very easy to say we shouldn't put any money towards education, but it's so much more than just educating children. It has to do with property values, why people come to this town, why people stay in this town, why people put money into this town. I don't think it should be a choice between our children or our seniors. I think that there has to be some middle ground. We can try to spread the wealth because there is a whole lot of wealth in this town. And I would really just recommend that you look at the education budget again, and really, Dr. Title put a lot of time into this, looked at it line item by line item. I don't think it was done, there's not any big black holes. It's all there, written out, pretty straightforward compared to budgets of years past, and I would really ask you to pass the education budget as it was presented by Dr. Title. And just a little pitch, the Early Childhood Center, we're looking for funding to redo their playground. We're talking about the most vulnerable proportion of our population here. These preschoolers who have special needs, many of them can't even use the playground because there's wood chips. We just need a little bit of funding, so if your child's in a wheelchair, they can go wheel their wheelchair out and play on the playground. So thank you for your time, and good luck. Christine Vitale, 254 Verna Hill Road.
Okay, we'll allow 1 or 2 more comments. Go ahead, Kate, I guess.
Kate Daniello, co-founder of We the People of Fairfield. With respect to the comments regarding that 70% of the budget is fixed costs that are personnel related due to the contracts approved through collective bargaining. And someone said that that we need to address that. And could we take out pension costs? Could we address medical benefit costs? And Bob brought up the fact that, salaries have come up, in comparison to the private sector. My comment with respect to that is timing is everything. If there's ever going to be a time in which we can get concessions from these bargaining units, it is now. And now is our time to act. And I encourage the Board of Finance, the Board of Education, the RTM to continue doing exactly what they are doing, which is sending these contracts back, particularly with respect to the pension and the medical benefits. To my knowledge, and I can ask Mr. Flato this, to my knowledge, the town has never gone to binding arbitration. I have yet to get a response from Dr. Title to see if the Board of Ed has ever gone to binding arbitration. Again, I want to suggest to the board that timing is everything. Now is the time. With respect to the Board of Education budget, Dr. Title should be commended. We worked with Dr. Clark, who I felt very often dug in her heels and simply said, I will not. Dr. Title has not done that. Instead of the way Dr. Clark used to do it, which was, let's start with the spending that we had this year and add whatever else we need to our budget, Dr. Title said, oh, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to start at zero and build the budget from there, which is a prudent way to do that. So I already see that Dr. Title is moving in a way that Dr. Clark did not, and we, the people, really commend him for doing that. With respect to capital improvements, Mr. Flato said that these newer buildings that we just built are now 8 years old, and they are starting to see some wear and tear, some project maintenance issues. I disagree with that. In the case of Ludlow Middle School, Roger Ludlow Middle School, that siding was decorative. Cedar siding, as Gaylord said, lasts a lot of years, and yet the capital improvements was requesting $250,000 to replace it. To me, that should not be in there. I think the Board of Finance agrees with that. Another item, Burr Street. Okay. Another item, Burr Street schools. They need something, I'm not sure exactly what it was, to fix the heating problem. Now, I disagree with Mr. Flato, who said that this is a new problem. That problem in the Burr Street School has been there. The heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system has been a problem since day one because the front of that school was built in glass. And when the sun comes up, which they should have realized, and the sun goes down, that school is affected. So that is not a new issue. It's an issue that occurred since the beginning of time, and we should be going back to the contractor to get that resolved without cost to the taxpayer. So there are things in the capital improvements that didn't just occur, that have been there for a long time. Another item I want to bring up is the cost to fix the facade of Tomlinson. I think it does need to be repaired. Okay, there is painting that needs to, and there are problems in front of the auditorium where they have those beautiful decorative columns. The estimate for that was $250,000. Yet Mr. Cullen only had support for $125,000 of it. When he was asked, well, what makes the difference? He said, well, it's possible that there's lead abatement that needs to be done. Is that $125,000? I don't know. Thank God Sherry Stenick had these capital improvements vetted by a town facilities commission who determined they were $1.5 million over budgeted. I'm sorry. That is not acceptable. When capital improvements come before the town boards, those numbers should be supported and they should be accurate. I was dumbfounded that this would be going on in a town like ours. Okay? So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, was there one more hand out there somewhere? I thought there was one more person. All right, okay. Yes, Sherry, please, this is select person Stenick.
Hi, I wasn't sure I was going to talk, but since I listened, I wanted to say something. There were a lot of really good points brought up on all different levels, but one thing that struck me is that we usually sit there and talk to department heads, administrators, and try to get a sense of where can we cut, what can we do. I'd like to put it out there right now to the firemen who are on the front lines, the police, the teachers, the town hall workers. If there's some way that you think that we can cut the budget, we can streamline things, and we haven't addressed it because we just aren't there on a day-to-day basis, send us an email, drop an anonymous note. I'm happy to receive them either at the First Selectman's office or at my office at the Higgins Group, because my house, it'll get lost. So either of those two places, email sherry@stenick.net, or whoever you want to email on this board, I'm sure would be happy to receive it. But I think we can all, do more with a fresh approach, and maybe some of these ideas that have come out, some are great, some may not particularly work because of various little glitches in state regulations and such. But I think we need to just open up our minds to different possibilities. And one thing that comes to mind when I was looking at the different middle schools, I'm not going to bring this up the way I usually do. When we were looking at the middle schools, talking about expansion of one of them, I went and looked at all the different schools, and when I was looking at the team building room, which is like a rock climbing room, it's extremely cool. If I was in, 13 years old or in middle school, I would have thought this was the ultimate. But it's not in use a lot. And we were talking about this, the administrator who was there with me, the principal. And I actually had a lot of respect for him after we left there because I was criticizing the fact that it wasn't in use, and that was a problem. Maybe we need to think some other way. And he said, well, I have to say, you're right, that there might have been a less expensive method of team building. There's always some way to do something. There's many ways to do most things. And I think we need to look and say, is there something else? Could we have taken that room and taken the rocks off the wall and used it for something else and found some other way to team build? Could they have walked on a balance beam with blindfolds on and the other kids are trying to help them not fall off the balance beam? There's a lot of ways to do something, and we need to just think outside of the box, and I think the people on the front lines might be the ones to help us get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. All right, we gotta go. All right, at this point, what I'm going to do is, first of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your commentary. Thank you for your attendance at our meetings, and thank you for your interest. I can assure you that my colleagues and I don't just sit here, listen, and forget the comments on the way home. That doesn't happen. That never happens. It doesn't happen with emails, doesn't happen with letters, and it doesn't happen in a forum like this. I do want to give board members a couple of minutes to comment on the items they heard today, and I'm going to start at my left down with Mr. Brown, and we'll go from there.
No singing. Yes. Did you hear what he said? He said no singing. Do you know, I hear that joke every week, right? My name is Jim Brown, and a lot of famous people have the name Jim Brown, but I'm not one of them. And I just want to be clear also, because there is another Jim Brown in town that would want me to make this distinction. People here probably read the editorials. I'm not the Jim Brown that writes the editorials. Okay, so good, bad, or indifferent, I just point that out. Jim Brown, Board of Finance, and there's Jim Brown that writes the editorials. That's why I go by James in here, just to make that. And he asked me to do that too, which is good. I just a couple points from today. I think this is a great dialogue. It's a great forum. I think it is healthy. I think it's necessary. And I also really do think it helps. It was about 2 years ago at this time where somebody approached me to run for the Board of Finance, which I agreed. I said, okay, I'll run for the Board of Finance. And then they told me it was a 6-year term. And I looked it up and I said, okay, it's a 6-year term. So it's a 6-year commitment. And after being on the Board of Finance for 1.5 years now, I understand why it's a 6-year commitment. Because there's a lot of details, a lot of research that goes into this budget. There's a lot of moving parts. So for those that have come in and you pick up the book and you look through it and you say, how do I get through it? That's the way I felt, honestly, 1.5 years ago. But through forums like this, through the meetings, through the help of the department heads, through the help of other volunteers, through the help of fellow residents, through the help of the people on this board, the Board of Ed, the RTM, people in our state legislature, I mean, it starts to come together and you start to understand it. And believe me, at the heart, I would say, of every discussion, of every thought, of every vote, for me anyway, there's 3 general levels of thinking, and everything kind of comes down from there. One of them, of course, is taxes and costs. I lived here a long time as well. I have 4 kids. They're going through the school system. I'm very, very conscious of taxes and cost of service, and that's why we do and I do a lot of research on that. The second is service expectations, okay, and what we've come to expect, and maybe where we've perhaps gone too far, where we could come back, but maybe we can't. It's always in my mind. And the third is our bond rating, which is extremely important. So with those 3 levels that are kind of at 50,000 feet, everything comes down, and then you make a call and you make a vote. But I just want to say again that I appreciate everyone that spoke. I appreciate the people that came. I appreciate the people that listened. And all of our emails are on the Fairfield, Connecticut government webpage. Feel free to contact me, and I'll be glad to listen. I mean, my phone number's on there. Give me a call. It's fine with me, because I think that this is what it takes to keep this town running. And again, I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
I know I always tell you not to sing, Jim. I just can't help myself. How's everybody doing out there? I'm Rob Bolito. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of Finance. I've been on the board since 2007. I'm a lifelong Fairfield resident. And we hear everything you guys say. Every single word. It is important to us because we're all taxpayers too. Before any of us got on this board, we were regular citizens. We were, dads, moms, not here tonight, but we were just regular people who went to school here, do business here, raise our families here. So there's nothing special about us except for the fact that we were crazy enough to volunteer for this board. It's important to keep in mind that as much as we want to keep taxes low, and we work toward that, and I think last year we did a pretty good job coming in at 1+% increase, is that there's always a consequence to whatever action you take. When you spend too much money, there's a consequence that you increase the burden on people, and people leave, and people just can't afford to stay here anymore. That's what happened to my grandparents. They moved here from the Bronx in 1953. They ended up having to move to Trumbull because it just got to be too expensive to live here on a fixed income. But when you cut things arbitrarily, it has a consequence as well. The reason why we had to build a Burr School in the first place, the reason why we had to build a new McKinley School in the first place, and I've picked on those schools as much as anybody in terms of their extravagance, the fact of the matter is we closed this school, and we closed Grasmere, and we closed Osborne Hill 30 years ago because we're trying to save a few bucks. And there is always a consequence to every action you take. So keep in mind that for the short-term benefit of cutting things, there's always a long-term consequence, and we can't kick the can down the road. We need to be conscious that there is a time for providing short-term relief and making sure that people today are not suffering and paying too many taxes and having to move out of town. But we also have to keep in mind that there's a long-term as well, and that what we do in the short term impacts what happens to residents tomorrow. We're in this mess we're in now with building a whole bunch of new schools and having to do all these renovations because 30 years ago we didn't pay proper attention to these things in an effort to save some money. And we have to make sure that doesn't happen again. That being said, there are certainly ways to do things more efficiently in order to save money today. And believe me, all 9 of us look at that each and every budget hearing, and we try to suggest ways, and every elected official does the same. And we listen to everything that every citizen says. In this day and age, the one good thing about technology is that it is easier than ever to get informed. And the fact that each of you were here this morning shows that you care and that you're willing to make the effort. Some people can't make it. They have lives to lead. We certainly do as well. But when you have access to newspapers on the internet, when you have public access television where you can watch the budget hearings at your pleasure, there's no excuse for not being informed. And it's good to see that more people are getting informed because, look, it's our tax dollars. We have a right to know where they're going and that they're being spent properly. And if there's something you object to and if there's something you think that is being done wrong, it's incumbent upon all of us as taxpayers and citizens to stand up and say, no, this isn't right. Or, yeah, you're doing things the right way, keep it up. So just keep in mind that we hear everything that you say, and that when we deliberate and we come up with a budget, we try to do something that's fair, that is fair to taxpayers, but that also provides the level of service that we've come to expect in this town. We're not New Canaan, we're not Bridgeport, we're Fairfield. And this is a town where everybody has a seat at the table and everybody should have equal access to the quality services that we provide. So thanks.
Mr. Tetra.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming here. This has been a great process, and as Mr. Flynn mentioned earlier, this is our 3rd year, and this is extremely valuable to us because with a lot of the late nights that we spend, we don't always see this full a room. So sometimes as you're sitting there talking about the budget and thinking about it, you like to know that there are other people out there that are listening and care what's taking place. Your feedback is very important. This is one of the chances we get to hear that. As was mentioned, keep those cards and letters coming. We're happy to get your emails, happy to get your phone calls. We are available on the Town of Fairfield website. This is, for many of you, I'm looking at some faces here that I haven't seen as much before, we haven't seen as much. I think it's great that you're getting involved. But I would ask you to stay involved, because as much as we've talked that a number of the problems or issues that we're facing are multi-year problems and issues that have cropped up, there also are multi-year solutions. It's not a 30-second fix. This is not your typical TV show where we're going to have it all done in 30 minutes. At the end of this budget process, we're not going to be able to fix everything that's been talked about here. That doesn't mean we don't need to fix it. We just can't do it all in 1 year. So it's important that you stay involved in that. As Mr. Brown mentioned, we're all stuck with 6-year terms, so we are involved in that. We need your support through that process. We need your feedback through that process. Also, just Mr. Flynn and I put together a presentation about the process, about the budget. We gave it at the PTA council meeting. We gave it one other time. We're happy to give that other times. As an old friend of mine said, you're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own set of facts. And what we're trying to do is educate the people of this town so you can understand the process, so we can raise the quality of discussion, so it's less frustrating, but we can get to the real heart of the matter and make sure there's some real dialogue and communication going place. So we're going to continue to try and do that, and if there are any representatives of groups out there, we'd be happy to sort out a time to do that. It's also available on Fair TV, and again, as has been mentioned, compliments to the folks on Fair TV about making this dialogue open to the entire community, whether you can make this meeting or another one. It's on Fair TV. It's also on the town website. If you click on the Fair TV link, you can watch these sessions at your convenience, at your leisure, and hear what was said, whether you were here or not. So I think that's important for our town in terms of coming together on this, because if we're going to come together and solve these problems, we've got to work together on that. We've got to meet on that. We don't want to pit one segment against another as we do this. So I thank you all for coming this morning, and look forward to seeing you at future meetings.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm Ken Brackfeld, and this is my second full year, or I'm in my second year on the Board of Finance, and I really have nothing major to add to what my colleagues have said, except thank you very much for coming out on a Saturday morning. It takes a lot of courage for citizens to stand up at the lectern and to express themselves in front of other people. This is actually a fairly nice turnout. We had a smaller number of people last year, so it does give us an indication that there's a lot of people who are obviously very concerned and very involved and very informed. I was very impressed with everybody's comments. So I can assure you that as a board, we're doing everything we can to get to the best possible solution to the obvious problem we have, which is how do we deliver services people seem to want at a cost that people can afford. And as always, I always like to say one big thank you, and that's to our chairman, Tom Flynn, who actually deserves a separate round of applause. The guy has a full-time job, a family, children, and puts in an inordinate amount of hours as chairman of this board. I get email after email from him. They're always highly intelligent. They take a lot of time, and I'm sure that we should all appreciate his efforts. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Bob Stone. This is my fourth budget on the Finance Board. I also had 6 on the RTM. I'd just like to ask a question. How many people got a raise last year? That's what I thought. I know your house values are down. I know your salaries are probably even or down. I know your savings are down. I know your retirement's down. And I feel your pain. This whole board understands that. And if you looked at the resume of this board, you'd be very impressed. We're going to take everything into consideration. We're like a 9-person jury, and we're going to do our best to hold the taxes as low as possible. So I want to thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the comments. It's not just the Board of Education. You know, there's a whole town with other departments, and we look at everything. So we will do that. We'll do our due diligence. I hope you, if you can't come to the meetings, which I know are mostly over, it is on TV. I make my wife watch it. It's very educational. And also the seminar that Tom and Mike Tetro did were really excellent and very informative. So I hope you see that. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming.
All right, as we wrap up, I would as well like to thank you all for coming. I started out this discussion today with a couple of budget facts, including I'm the one who quoted the 70% on the compensation side and said it was contractual. And I did that because I think that sometimes people forget that government is a service industry, and the vast majority of your expenses are people costs. Now, those people costs can be controlled. In an environment where you have union contracts, your ability to control those are limited to the periods when the union contracts are up for negotiations. And our first selectman is in the midst of those negotiations with most of our union contracts right now. And the Board of Education starts their contract negotiations for their next round of contracts in the next year. There was one gentleman who got up today and spoke about things that he's done in his own company regarding salary reductions, 401k plan, things of that nature. I, too, work in the media industry, and within our business in the last 2 years, and by the way, I'm in the media industry, and we service the financial services industry, okay? So we were at the epicenter of the storm. In 2 years, our revenues went down by 35%. Our staffing had to go from 525 people to 370 people. Every person in my company took a 10% reduction in salary, suspension of their 401k match, and increased kick-in for their medical costs. I'm the person, because I'm the chief financial officer, who had to put most of that in place. So I know what it's like to make those tough decisions, and many of you have had to make in your business. And by the way, I was not immune to them either. And if I may be so bold, no one on our board was immune to those type things. As Mr. Flato said, sometimes government in the short term doesn't have that same opportunity. This board, and the reason I brought up the 70% and the contractual obligations, this board cannot say you need to take a furlough. This board cannot say we will not kick into the pension. This board has no power to say we want you to kick in more for your medical. Those are all contracts that never come before our board. We're not part of that process. What we can do is reduce the funding in those departments. Okay? Now, if those contracts don't get negotiated the right way, or in a way, and as Mr. Flato said, it's binding arbitration, then the people get laid off. It's not a fact that the people just get reductions. They get laid off. And that might be okay. Okay, that might be okay. That might be what the townspeople want, a reduction in service in that, in these tough economic times. But to Mike's point, when we go and give the presentations, it's good that everybody's working with the same set of facts. It's good that everybody's educated and understand the complexities that are involved. Other people got up here today and said, hey, it's a complex budget book. Yeah. Yeah, it is a complex budget book. It's a complex budget. Government is hard. Government is hard at the town level when you have the state on top of you with their mandates. It's hard at the town level when you have the feds with their mandates. It's hard when some of the things that need to be done are not of our decision-making ability. But we do the best we can. We listen to the townspeople. We understand what the concerns are. We share the same concerns. And within our purview and within our control, I can tell you across party lines, Republican, Democrat, anybody who serves on this board will tell you the same thing, that we do our darndest to control that and balance that out as best we can. And that's our goal, and that's our pledge to you as your representatives. So again, we want to thank you for coming today. Feel free to email us if you have any questions, comments, concerns, and we'll do the best we can to get back to you. Thank you.